This is Growth Climate's Kenneth Patey presenting The Anatomy of Human Interaction. Section 2, The Mind, How It Works.
The human mind actually receives about 100 million pieces of input every second of every day, 24 hours a day. How would you like to have to process and make decisions about all of that kind of input? We don't need to do that because of the way the mind operates. Let's take a look at a diagram of the mind. If you'll turn to page 2 of section 2, we're going to talk about the conscious mind. This is the data processing center. We're going to talk about memory storage, or our memory banks. And we're going to talk about the reticular formation. The reason we don't have to process all of that information, that 100 million pieces of input every second, is because of the reticular formation. It is a filter that is about 2/3 the size of your own little finger. It sits at the top of the spinal cord in the brain stem, right where it joins to the cerebral cortex. So as that spinal cord comes up, it flanges out for that filter and then makes the connector. The only thing we have to deal with is the decision really of that filter system. It has an alert list. The only things you will deal with consciously are things that are of value, or things that are a threat, things that are unusual, or things that you have programmed your mind to watch for. Let's give an example. If you were to take the sense of sound, and here we have sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, and we've added another one, sixth sense. Some people have that instinctive, intuitive sense, very vibrant and very alive in them, and they will pick up things. If a message of sound comes into the mind, right here at the base of this filter, it splits into 2 copies. One copy goes into the filter for comparison against the alert list. The other copy goes around the filter to the sensor receptors in the conscious mind for sound. The one that goes around the filter, before the sound reaches the brain, the filter system has done its business and sends an alert to the conscious mind about what it should do or should not do. Let me illustrate with an example. When I was about 12 years of age, I went out to a little town in southern Alberta by the name of Barnwell. Barnwell, Alberta had a massive metropolis population of 500 at the time. My grandparents and my aunts and uncles lived several miles north of Barnwell in a farming area. Barnwell had a train station. And obviously, if you have a train station, you also have train tracks. Canadian National Rail System went through Barnwell. I didn't know then when it went through, I just knew that it did it. In front of that was Trans-Canada Highway that went from Vancouver clear out to the Maritime Provinces. Right across from the train station was an old service station, the kind that had 2 glass jars, the kind that you would pull the handle back and forth and pump the gasoline up into the jar. Then you'd put the nozzle in the tank and count down the number of notches, and then you'd pay your 35 cents for filling your tank. Wouldn't those be nice days? Right off here to the side was a 3-story above-ground farmhouse that belonged to a family by the name of LeBaron. I stayed in the upstairs front bedroom of that 3rd floor with their son Richard, who was my age. Now, how many of you, just out of curiosity, have spent time in the country? Most of you, at some point or another. What are typical sounds for the country at night? Animal sounds, crickets, coyote, owls, and they're a real hoot too, aren't they? What else would you hear?
Frogs.
Yes, and even the wiggles of tadpoles in a stagnant pond that wasn't too far away. All kinds of wonderful sounds. A weasel in the chicken coop was one I remember one night, and the attendant cursings of my uncle, the screen door slamming to the side, and all of that mayhem and squawking of those chickens, and then the deafening and then silencing sound of a shotgun blast, and then there was no more weasel, and the chickens quieted for the rest of the night. Those were typical farm sounds. I understood those, the cow mooing and everything else. What I was not prepared for, however, was the train. What do trains do 1/4 mile from the crossing? There was a crossing just a half a block down from the LeBaron residence, and of course the sign here that said we had a train crossing. What do trains do about 1/4 mile from the crossing? They blow the whistle. In those days, it was the old steam-powered, coal-fired engine. That was enough in itself. That was enough to wake you up anyway, but that steam whistle let loose. And when that sound came in, I was up off that mattress just like a rocket, and I said, "What in the world is that?" And my friend Richard said, "It's just the eastbound freight." And I said, "How often does that happen?" He said, "Every morning at 4:45. And I grumbled and went back to sleep. Now, a question for you. How long do you think it would take for me not to hear that train? Guesses?
A week?
2 weeks? What else?
2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days?
Yeah.
Somebody else? A month? You know, the brain is a very interesting piece of equipment. It would take you 2 or 3 days. It'd take you 2 weeks. It'd take you about a month. I had a friend that bought a condo. I don't know how the real estate agent got him to that condo 3 times as he viewed it and signed the papers without letting him see the Union Pacific trunk line that was 25 feet off his back fence. He called me the next morning and he said, "Ken, I've made a terrible mistake." I said, "What's wrong, Jim?" He said, "The freight trains burn through here all night long. I don't think I will ever be able to sleep through them." I saw him 6 weeks later. I don't think he'd slept. He had the biggest bags under his eyes. He sold the home at a loss. Actually moved out and just left it. "Get what you can. I've got to get out of here." Well, let's talk about how this works. The message of sound will come in. It goes to the alert list. The other copy goes around heading for here, but before it reaches the sensor receptors, the alert list will do its job. Here's how the conversation would go in the reticular formation. Is this train whistle a value? Oh yes, train whistles are always a value. Is it a threat? Yes, if there's a train in Patey's bedroom, he's in big trouble. Is it unusual? Yes, we don't hear trains at 4:45 in the morning. Tell everybody upstairs to wake up. And so the alert is sent. This message comes screaming into the conscious mind, but I'm already awake because I've been alerted by the reticular formation of a threat to my life. Well, now the second morning, I heard it, pulled the pillow over my head, grumbled a bit, and went back to sleep. Third morning, I slept right on through. But did I hear the train? The answer is yes, but here's what happens in the filter. Is this train whistle a value? Yes, train whistles are always a value. Is it a threat? No, he's in Barnwell. Is it unusual? No, train whistle always blows at 4:45 in the morning in Barnwell. Tell everybody upstairs to sleep on through. And so this message then comes screaming in after the directive to the mind to ignore it. And so I sleep right on through, no longer hearing the train. Now I have a question, ladies. Do any of you have a reasonably young, newbornish kind of a kitty? When your husband says, "I didn't hear the baby cry," do you think he's a liar? Ladies, how many of you have wondered when your husband said, "I didn't hear the baby cry"? You did too. How many think your husband's lied to you all these years? You know something? The way the mind works, if you're the one that gets up on a regular basis to care for that child, to change it, to feed it, nurse it, whatever it is, if you're the one who does it, he will never wake up unless there's a disruption to your pattern. Let me interrupt this story to ask a question. How many of you have a particular time in the morning that you wake up with no alarm? A set, precise, to the minute time. What time, Brandon?
6:30.
6:30, not 6:31? Not 6:29?
I don't even set my alarm anymore.
Oh. How many else have that kind? What time is yours? 5:45. Anybody have a weird time like 5:28 or 6:11? Does anybody have kind of a weird time, or do you all wear on these 5-minute characters? How many of you have an alarm system that resets itself like your computers for daylight saving time? Anybody?
Resets for the weekend.
Resets for the week. And resets for the weekend, Friday night. And it doesn't go off, right? Isn't that wonderful? You see, the brain works that way. You can set it for whatever you want. A lot of people don't know that. But you can literally set that alarm. Now let's come back to the baby. I know of a couple who had twins, a boy and a girl. They decided that since this was such a heavy duty with getting up in the night with 2 children, that if the boy woke up, he would get up and take care of the boy, and the wife, if the girl woke, she would get up and care for the girl. When the boy cried, the wife never heard it. When the girl cried, the husband never heard it. Now let's talk again about precise time. Let's say, for example, that the wife is the one who gets up to tend the baby. And she doesn't get out of bed until the baby's cried for 21 seconds. And she pulls the cover back, she swings her feet out onto the floor, grabs her house coat, puts it on, walks across the hall. It's another 17 seconds, time she gets to the baby's room. As soon as she opens the door and the baby hears that handle turn, baby stops crying. And so now we are 38 seconds and the baby quits crying and husband doesn't hear it. If the mother, however, and you want to test this on your husbands, try this. Wait 27 seconds, poke while you put on your robe, so that it's about 40, 45 seconds, and that will be unusual. And because it is an unusual amount of time, something must be wrong. And the reticular formation, because it is an unusual time sequence, will alert you, and the husband will wake up. You could lay right there in bed and watch him. And after the time it would normally take you to get to the baby, he will stir. Because it isn't, something's wrong here. It's not working right. That is really how precise the mind is. The reticular formation also has another interesting task. If you look over on this part of your page, you will find a statement that says the reticular formation will keep you acting consistent with your beliefs. How many of you, for example, have been to, or for information, how many have been to the entertainment form of hypnotism? Any of you been to one? Orem High School used to invite a hypnotist every other year as a student body assembly. I had 3 children in the school, 3 daughters, and one of the boys that went up on the stage was a football player. His name was Max. And he went up there with the group, was hypnotized, and that skillful man had hypnotized the group, and then under hypnosis gave the kids instructions. I went up onto the stage of the Capitol Theater in my hometown of Lethbridge, Alberta, when Ravine was there. I was 16. 2 of my friends and I went up to prove that he couldn't hypnotize us, and he didn't. And we stood there looking like idiots on the side while he had the other 17 under hypnosis. He got their attention and just ping, there they were. And one by one he went down that row of 17 individuals, giving them instructions, post-hypnotic suggestions, if you will, so that after they were awake, a cue word would bring them into some kind of action. Or he, in some cases, literally gave them an assignment, or in some cases, actually a belief. Max was very interesting at Orem High. My daughter said he was told under hypnosis not to sit on the edge of the hardwood stage because somebody had spilled a tube of super glue. And when he was out of hypnosis, the first thing the man did said, "Would you please sit there?" Someone to the audience. As soon as everybody was positioned where he wanted them, he said, "Come back up for a second." Guess what? That young man could not move. He tried pushing this way. He tried pulling up on his leg. And of course, up to that moment, he'd just been sitting there being watched by his peers and all the football team. And when he couldn't lift his leg, his face went a little bit red. And somebody said, "Hey, Max!" And this kid couldn't move. Why couldn't he? Could he tell you why? See, you say he believed he was fastened with super glue, but consciously does he know that? You see, under hypnosis, the message goes to the subconscious. One of the cutest was what happened in the Capitol Theater. A beautiful lady, the most elegant I had seen in the theater. She was wearing clothes like right out of the loft. You know, one of these exquisite, expensive lady stores. Gold rings, gold bracelet, gold earrings, necklace, high heels. Absolutely a head turner, gorgeous. And he said to her, and for want of remembering the cue word, Ravine said to her something like this: when you hear the word sunrise, I made that part up, sunrise. When you hear the cue word, wherever you are in the audience, you will stand up on your chair and crow like a rooster. One of the favorite ones that is done is to tell an individual that a glass on a table, just a simple little glass like this one, weighs 500 pounds. And that glass would be set on a table somewhere on the stage. About 20 minutes after the performance had started and everybody was in the audience, Ravine used the cue word, like, oh, the other day at sunrise, and everybody's head turned to see where this lady was. We all watched. You know, we paid to see this. And by the time I got focused where she was, what happens, by the way, to a theater seat when you stand up?
Oh.
She folded it back down, she climbed up on it with her high heels, and she got herself perched. That's the only word. And when she was balanced on that wobbly seat, she began to do this. And she gave the most pitiful rooster crow I have ever seen. I've been on a farm, I know what they sound like, and it wasn't her. But she gave that sound. And only when she finished the crow did she recognize what she was doing. And it was, oh my gosh, why didn't you hold me in my seat? No way, that's why we came, right? To enjoy this. The most interesting one is the glass. I have not seen this one. I have read it. I have heard about it. It's been talked about a lot. The most macho male who was told that the glass weighed 500 pounds and who's now sitting on the stage waiting for whatever's going to happen to him is told by the hypnotist, would you please pick up the glass? He walked over, got hold of the glass, and as he tried to lift it, couldn't. He got it with two hands. He got it this way. He tried this way, and with no success, he tried to lift the glass. What would you think? Kind of silly. To amplify, now if this is a macho male, and they always pick the most macho, they picked a wisp of a girl and sent her to do it. She walked over, picked up the glass, set it back down. Now the man is told to do it again. He still can't lift it. He will perspire and can't lift the glass. What do you think the audience says? And it's always shouted out by somebody. Yeah, wimp's a good one. That's what his friends would say, wimp. Well, what would? Fake, phony. And somebody hollers it out. A university team was brought into such a performance. After that shout of fake or phony, it was announced that they would do an experiment. They hooked up electrodes to the man's biceps. These are the ones that let you do the lifts and the curls. And they asked him then, with that electrode hooked up to a dial that registered upward thrust in foot-pounds, they asked him to lift the glass. He tried. The dial registered 100 foot-pounds of upward thrust. What should 100 foot-pounds of upward thrust or lift do to an 8-ounce glass? It'd be gone, wouldn't it? Is the glass fighting back? No, it is not. So scientifically, if 100 foot-pounds of upward thrust is being exerted on an 8-ounce glass to lift it upward, what has to be occurring? There has to be at least 100 foot-pounds of downward pressure. They hooked up electrodes to the man's triceps, had him lift again, and the upward thrust was 100 foot-pounds of upward on the biceps. The triceps were registering a downward thrust of 105, keeping the man acting totally consistent with his belief. Whether the belief was true or false, which was it?
False.
It's false. And whether it is known to him consciously or unknown, which is it? Unknown. You see, the human mind is engineered literally to keep us acting consistent with our beliefs, whether they are true or false, known or unknown. So that becomes a very, very interesting challenge. Let's put it in another example. How many of you have heard of Roger Bannister? Who was he, Steve?
He was the first to break the 4-minute mile.
The first to run a mile in under 4 minutes. Why hadn't anybody done it?
Belief system, because shortly after he broke it, many others followed.
See, the belief was you couldn't run a mile in under 4. In the same year that he broke the 4-minute mile in official race, there were some 12 to 15 others who also broke it. I think there were 5 in one race alone that people broke that race limit in under 4 minutes. It is a function of our belief system. And when we have a belief in place, we are locked, according to that belief, into a certain kind of conduct or a certain level of performance. It is literally that powerful. Let's take a look now at memory banks. Our memory banks, and this is a very interesting thing, the purpose here is not to show you where they are. It's simply to show the interrelated functions of the conscious mind, the memory banks, and the reticular formation. There are some that wonder if a memory cell is literally like a hologram. How many of you know what a hologram is? A hologram is a picture that can be projected into a fine mist in a room, and you see the image of the person or the picture that's being projected into the mist. But if you got close enough, you will find that every droplet of moisture has the same whole picture. It's part of the picture, but it also is the whole picture. That's holographic in nature. Isn't that a fascinating thing? We have a similar thing in the human body. Our cells, each cell in the human body can give to scientists today what piece of information? The genetic coding. The entire genetic coding of an individual is found in any single cell of that individual. 80,000 cells in this hand, or whatever there are. Every one of those cells has the programming to produce insulin. Did you know that? But it doesn't. Only the pancreas does. But the coding is in all of them. That's kind of like a holographic concept in terms of human cells, isn't it? Memory is fascinating to us, though, in some very other profound kinds of ways. Do you know that our brain literally records everything we experience? It is a powerful video recorder. It is a powerful audio recorder. It records it all. Everything you experience, important, unimportant, is recorded. You think, well, my gosh, we'll run out of tape. They don't have to change tapes like they do for this kind of a performance, but it just keeps recording. I had a couple of very fascinating experiences with my children. My oldest son came down to my office. We have 11 children, unheard of number in many families today. And when you have that many children, no matter how close or widely spread, you have varying interests in television. So we had to have a television location and a VCR for the older kids, one for the middle range and one for the children, the little tiny kiddies, to watch Disney or other cartoon programs. Well, on this particular evening, a knock on my office door, and my son said, "Dad, all 3 other places are being used. Are you busy, or could I watch a movie in your office?" I was doing a sorting project on a counter, and I said, "Help yourself, just keep it low." So he positioned himself in my easy chair, put his feet up on my desk to enjoy himself. I was working over here at the counter with no intent at all to pay anything to mind about that movie. And all of a sudden, I became aware I was watching the movie. And I said to myself, that's where he did this. And I spun around in my chair and said, yep, that's what it was. And I turned back. And for the next 90 minutes, I found myself double checking what I was seeing here and what was playing on the VCR and TV set. And I was never wrong. The part that fascinated me, it had been several years since I had seen the movie only one time, the night I had recorded it, and then it went into my library. And yet all of that detail was still there. I'm going to hum a few bars from a song. And I'd like you to tell me after I'm finished, not about my performance, what it is went through your mind. Da 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 da. Ta da ta da ta 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 da ta 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 da ta ta ta. What did you see, please?
Well, isn't that from the Fiddler on the Roof? Or
It is from Fiddler on the Roof. Who was doing what?
Wasn't it the guy singing? What he was singing and dancing?
If I were a rich man. Yabba dabba 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 da. Who was it? Tevye. Where was he? In the barn. Where in the barn? He's in the loft. Who has seen it recently? Not a one. How long ago? How long ago for you?
10 years.
10 years ago. Interesting. The memory, it's all there. We can pull it back. We were on a trip to Canada. I'd asked the children, again, to select a range of videos. We had a VCR and TV in the van. And for an 800-mile trip, it's great. And the older kids had watched, the middle range kids had watched. It was now time for the little kids, and somebody grabbed one of the older range videos, and I said, wait a second, it's time for the little ones. And I heard a voice at the back said, I want to watch Bambi. And in went the tape. But I didn't hear anybody moving to let my youngest son get up there to watch it. And I said, are you going to make room for Aaron or aren't you? And little Aaron piped up and he said, and I looked in my mirror, and here he was laying on the back deck of the van with his arms folded, his feet crossed over. He said, I don't need to go up there, Dad. I'm watching the movie in my head. See, and of course, with little kids, they watch them umpteen dozen times, and he could see it all. Our memory banks are wonderful. We can very, very easily have memory triggered. How many of you will have something said, or you hear a few words of a song, or you smell something, and you're back 20 years ago? Now, you have to be old enough to be back 20 years. The greatest elicitor of memory is smell. The olfactory nerves bring back memory more quickly than anything else. Okay, let's talk about another facet of this memory process. Not only does the mind record what we experience, it actually makes 2 recordings. So here is an event, and the 2 recordings are, number 1, the actual event exactly the way it occurred. The other recording is our perception of the event, which may or may not be accurate. What would make our perception of an event be different from the actual?
Any experience in the past?
It could be an experience from the past. What else would it be? And of course, if it's an experience from the past, something else accompanies it. What makes what you see different than it really is?
What you feel.
What you feel can impact it. What else?
What you believe.
What you believe. Your beliefs will impact your perception, causing you to see it in a different light than if you didn't have that belief. Now there's another element. Not only does it make 2 recordings, it records the emotion that accompanies the event. The stronger the emotion, the deeper the memory impress. In fact, from the television series The Body Human, produced for PBS, the doctor who talked about it said that the brain produces some 3,000 to 4,000 different chemicals, and that each emotion has its own chemical output. For example, and you will know some of these, what is the chemical that is released into the human body when you are frightened? Epinephrine? Another common name for it? Adrenaline. Tell me the physiological changes that occur when adrenaline dumps into your system. Your heart rate is up. The digestion process literally will slow, right?
You get confused.
You say you get confused?
Confusion, so you have less blood going to the brain.
Interestingly enough, without adrenaline, that would be the case. Because what happens under that is the brain goes on garner mode. What does it mean to garner? It means to gather every little piece of information. So under threat, we're trying to track it all the information. And the reason the heart rate goes up is to compensate for that. What literally happens is this. Have you noticed that when you get frightened, what happens on your arms?
You get chills.
And what does your body do? What?
Shakes.
The hair stands on, and see the surface of the body goes ching, and the hair follicle just pops up like this, okay? You got a little goosebump. What it is the blood vessels on the surface of your entire body, in the squeezing of all those surface muscles, squeezes off the capillaries, so that if you get hurt, you won't bleed badly. At the same time, the artery system to the brain actually enlarges, it engorges, and sends more blood to the brain so that we can process all that extra data that we're receiving. We want to track all the sounds we hear, what are our escape routes, what have I been taught to do, and we're trying to track all of these options that we have. The brain, by the way, uses 45% of the body's power supply at normal time. But under threat, under fear, it actually needs more power to process all that extra data that it's pulling in. How many know what a pyracantha bush is? Pyracantha is an innocuous looking hedge with little tiny leaves, and it looks so nice and so pretty. But hidden in the leaves are needles that are about this long, and they are as stiff as literal steel needles, and very, very fine, sharp points. If you were to run through a pyracantha bush in playing with your friends, playing tag, and you made the mistake of running through a hedge, you would have yourself with cuts, and you would be bleeding profusely because it will cut you deeply. And so you'd be bleeding all over the place. However, if you were fearful and without awareness ran through the same bush with the effect of adrenaline, you will find the scratches and just a little droplet or two of blood here and there, but you won't bleed like you would. Why? Because of that process caused by the chemical release into the system, tightens the surface capillaries so they don't bleed, sends that extra power supply to the brain. Your heart rate will be up. Interesting process. Every emotion we experience has its own. The doctor said, kind of interestingly, that the emotion which has the greatest harm potential for a human being is one when a person becomes angry. Now, I want to differentiate between the emotion of anger and the action form of that word, which is angry. If you look up the word anger in a dictionary, it just talks about it being an emotion. If you look up angry, it is an action form of the word. Hate is an emotion. Hatred is an action form. It's kind of interesting to look at several of those. But the stronger the emotion, the deeper the memory impress, because memory is a process of a chemical etching in the brain. Now, if you want to have something cement in your mind pretty deeply, replay it. The thing that's fascinating is that when you replay an event, a past history event, and you replay it, the second you replay the event, the emotion again occurs, and the emotion triggers the release of the chemical. The chemical then re-etches the memory experience, and it's doubly impressed in your mind. Let's take a person who has a negative experience at school, is embarrassed, a lot of embarrassment and chiding from his peers, and he has that chemical etch of that experience indelibly and brilliantly impressed in his mind. He's on his way home from school. Somebody says, "Aha, you sure looked like a fool in school." Now he reruns it again. The emotion comes, the chemical is released, and the memory again is retraced. And this etching process creates not just a little tiny hairline, but each time it plays, it etches it deeper and more deeply than before. When he gets home, his mother says, "How was school?" If he thinks through the process, again, that same thing occurs. And what might have been a little tiny trace, a little fine line memory etch, becomes a Grand Canyon memory gorge that can be triggered at any time. One of the reasons it's important to understand this process is that when a past event is triggered, a person may not even know what triggered it, but once it is triggered and that chemical is released, they may think it is a current new experience. When in fact, if they could stop long enough to kind of monitor what is happening, they'll recognize the whole thing is a replay in the mind. The interesting thing about the mind is that the mind does not differentiate between a real experience and one that is vividly imagined. So even the imagination, the thinking through of something, can trigger a fear-producing moment which triggers the dumping of a chemical into the brain. Memory. Very, very interesting process.